Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through my 23 best books of 2023, and also today is January 23rd, the day this will go up, so it's a lot of the number 23. But regardless, this is in no particular order. I'm not starting from book 23 and then going all the way up to 1. I have a hard enough time even deciding 23 books that I wanted to talk about, and the idea of trying to rank them is just too difficult for me. But anyway, I'm just gonna jump right into it. Again, no particular order, and I'm just gonna reach for things off of my cart. And the first one we have is Engines of Chaos. This is a series that I have applauded many a time at this point. This is the second book, the sequel after Engines of Empire, and the series name is called The Age of Uprising. This is the closest thing, in my opinion, to what a lot of us really enjoyed about Game of Thrones, where it's a lot of different characters, it's a lot of scheming, there's all pretty morally great characters throughout, but the way in which everybody's intricate plot lines are interwoven is something that I could not get enough of. This is what I want out of epic fantasy. I love the setting. I really enjoy following all the different characters. I'm always on the edge of my seat. It's constantly keeping me on my toes. And also, when it comes to the magic, I often have no idea what's going on, which is not usually a pro for me. Usually I want to have a firmer grasp. But the way that the author does it in this series is it truly feels so almost horror-like, where you're like, what even is happening? This is so odd and traumatic for these characters, and I want them to get out of this, but also I want to understand this more. And it's hard to describe what the actual plot is, but essentially we are on the verge of magic and religion clashing, and we're looking at all of the prominent players within those two groups, as well as how everybody is trying to utilize these things for their own financial gain. And that's where you meet our main characters, who are a part of the Hawkspur Guild. It's a great series. I love it. I don't know when the third one's coming out, but hopefully the release date will be announced soon, because I really want that third book. After that, we have The Flat Share. So I did talk about this one recently in a book that surprised me from 2023, as the cover, the synopsis, everything about it makes it seem like it's going to be silly and cutesy. And it is, but it had a lot more depth than I was expecting. Not that I think silly and sweet books can't have depth. I just wasn't anticipating that based off of how much it seemed like the silly cute factor was going to be there in the story. And you follow this young woman who ends up renting this flat where the roommate that she'll have is somebody who works the night shift, and then she works days, so they never actually cross paths, but they're living in the same space. And by leaving notes to each other and by living in the same space, they are getting to know each other. And she is somebody who is sort of breaking down the difficulties of her previous relationship and the lasting effects of that, and especially on her mental health. And then you're seeing with our other character a few different things. One, he is a palliative care nurse, and so he works with a lot of people who are in physical... They have a lot of needs physically with their health, and so he is helping them, and a lot of his patients are so sweet. But on top of that, his brother has been wrongfully imprisoned, and so he is trying to do what he can to help his brother. And you just kind of get to know these characters, and then you also get to see how these characters get to know each other, and how they're honestly such wonderful additions to each other's lives. And I really quite liked this one. If you didn't notice by me talking about this one, this is not top 23 fantasy. These are top 23 books. Most of them will be fantasy, but we will have some other genres mixed in. Next up, we have Encyclopedia Fairies. I promise that, because 2 of the first 3 I mentioned have more of the romantic plot lines within them. I promise that's not the case for all of them. And if it was, that's fine too. But it just so happens that the first 2 of the first 3 are like, oh yay, love stories. This one follows a young woman who is in academia, and she is trying to figure out everything she can about the Fae. And I know so many of us hear Fae and we're like, snooze. We just are so done with Fae stories. I do think that this one is interesting in that a lot of Fae stories where you hear Fae and romance are both within the book, you think it's going to be kind of the sexy, angsty Fae story. And that's not the case with this one at all. It feels somewhat historical fiction fantasy, as it takes place in our own world, and you're following this woman who, as I said, is in academia. She goes to this rural area, and the Fae are very much the kind that you see in folklore, and they honestly verge on being the kinds of fae you would see in almost horror stories. It's very grim, it's very dark. They play with humans, with their emotions, with their lives, with their sense of reality, and they're very cruel and they're very wicked, but it's kind of just a part of their nature. And so you are seeing her trying to create an encyclopedia about all of these, and her co-worker decides to tag along, and where she is somebody who's very to herself, very private, very introverted. He's very extroverted and charming and such an annoyance, but kind of lovingly endearing. And you're seeing these two work together to try and learn more about what seems to be a threat in this rural area. And I greatly enjoyed it. I cannot wait to read Map of the Otherlands. I think it comes out right around when this video will go up, so hopefully I will be well within the pages of the sequel. Next up we have Bonesmith. This one was so fun. I know I said it so many times in talking about it. I really was not expecting it to be the wild ride that it was. What really made this one stand out, more than just being fun, is that the world I thought was really cool, and in a current fantasy landscape that is so rooted in the fae, that is so kind of, okay, I'm building upon classic fantasy tropes, where you're seeing kind of a lot of the same. This one stood out to me in that it really fully embraced its world, and its world stands apart, in my opinion, to a lot of the other things. I liked the creativity of it, and I liked how well fleshed out it was, but how well it was interwoven into the story without feeling like, okay, break to talk about the world. It just flowed, it felt well realized, it felt lived in, and it felt like our main character was a part of this world. And if you don't know, you follow a young woman named Ren, who is a bonesmith, and there are different kinds of smiths, and they manipulate different things. So as you would expect, bonesmiths manipulate bones. Their magic is kind of rooted in that. And you have different groups within each of the smiths. So Ren is part of what is basically the warrior class. And the very beginning opens where it feels rather tropey, feels familiar, almost cliche. And so if you do decide to pick this one up, know at the beginning is kind of like, okay, been there, done that. When is it getting interesting? And I thought it was still enjoyable, but I was kind of waiting. And then once it did pick up, after Ren's plans for her life go in a completely different direction, once it really gets going, that's when not only the world opens up, but Ren's view of her world opens up as well. And there's a lot more at stake and a lot more at play, which I really liked seeing. After that, we have Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. So just talking about Bonesmith in its unique setting, you can just copy paste so much of what I said. Although the settings are of course incredibly different, I appreciated how unique this story was. I appreciate how unique its setting specifically. And I think this one perfectly shows what sci fantasy has to offer. I also think that this one, despite being a Cosmere work, and typically Cosmere works are adult, I think this one leans a little bit more toward young adult, especially given the way in which our main characters are grappling with their personal insecurities, what they've gone through in life, and just kind of trying to find themselves and find their own voice and who they want to be and how they want to fit into the world. I really love this one. I've said time and time again that I am definitely biased in that I loved the nods to Final Fantasy X, and I've always wanted to see nods like that in a story, and we definitely got that in this, which made me very, very happy. And I just really enjoyed getting to know these characters, as well as the world, and seeing their relationship blossom, and how they kind of push each other, and the banter with each other. It is silly, and some of the humor was not my all-time favorite, because some of Sanderson's humor is sometimes a little extra cheesy for me, but I thought that the characters in this were just so sweet, and they themselves, especially Yumi in particular, was so silly that it was just kind of, I think, Sanderson's humor done in a way that I like. After that, we have The Crane Husband. This is one that I almost didn't quite put on this list just because it is so bleak, and there really are very few moments of hope and light and happiness, and I tend to like books that show the full depths of what it is to be a person and the cruelties of the world, with also the highs and seeing people love they have for each other, whether that be sibling relationships, parental to a child, romantic, whatever the case may be, or just like a passion that they have and seeing the joy they get from that, whatever the case may be. I like seeing the extremes. This one pretty much just sits in the tragedy, but I think it depicted domestic abuse, especially the effects it has on children within a home, even if they themselves are not the ones being physically harmed. I think it depicted that so incredibly well that I felt I couldn't exclude it from this list. It is very, very short. I think it might actually be considered a novella, but I thought it was very powerful. There's some other interesting themes to dissect within this, but even if you just go in knowing that that's the main theme, I think it does it very well. I would highly recommend that one with, of course, the little asterisk of if you've experienced this, it might be difficult. For me, I've experienced that, and I actually liked, as awful as that sounds, I liked seeing it depicted in book form. I think helps sort of process things, especially when you've experienced those things as a child and then you're kind of reflecting as an adult. I think books like this can kind of help us get through it. So because of that, not just how well that was written, but the impact I think it can have on a person, I, like I said, had to include it on this list. Next up we have, I'm going to go ahead and purposefully find one that isn't fantasy. So hold on. That was fantasy. Let's get into some that are not. And we have Yellowface, Mame, and Cobalt Red. Cobalt Red might be among, if I were to do a top 5, this one would absolutely be within that top 5. One of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. I think it's very, very, very difficult as it shows the true horrors of this situation. If you don't know, you are looking at the people in the Congo who are having to mine cobalt and why there's such a demand for cobalt, the various different circumstances within various different mines, and how there doesn't seem to be any hope or any light at the end of the tunnel. And so what can we do as individuals, and what can we do with the knowledge that this book grants us? I just think it's a very powerful book. I think everybody should read it. I talked about it recently as it was one of the very last books that I read in 2023, and so I talked about it a little bit more in my end of the year wrap up. I think it's a must read. If you are somebody who picks up nonfiction, definitely pick this one up. If you don't tend to pick up nonfiction, I think this one is a very, very important book, and it's very relevant to things that are going on now. Not that there aren't, of course, other nonfiction books that are important. There's so many out there, but this one I just think it's such a dilemma, and I think it can make us more informed consumers, it can make us more informed voters, whatever the case may be. I just think in general being more informed about that issue is very important. Yellowface is one that I could have substituted out for some of my honorable mentions. So I don't know, depending on the day, I might put one of my honorable mentions here instead. And if you're curious what those honorable mentions are, I have City of Nightmares, just because it's so quirky and so weird, and I had so much fun with it. And then also Magician's Daughter, which was not quirky and weird. It was just lovely and kind of a little bit sad and melancholy, but beautiful all the same. I think it's a coming-of-age story done just chef's kiss perfectly, while still being very cozy and having great familial relationships. So those two I loved, and I kind of wanted to put them on this list, but I'm like, I don't know. So like I said, any given day, I might have put those on the list instead of Yellowface, but I'm having Yellowface here just because I really was so taken aback by how much I enjoyed that one. Not because I didn't think R.F. Kuang is a good writer or anything like that. I do think R.F. Kuang is a good writer. It's just that I haven't really felt gripped as strongly as I have wanted to do by her previous works. I think Babel is fantastic in a lot of ways, but I also wish that with how heavy the themes were, that we'd really dug in a little bit more. I think if we had, it would have taken it to the next level. And I think with the Poppy War, there was just certain things about that one that made it so that it wasn't necessarily an all-time favorite. So when I picked up Yellowface, I was like, okay, I'm fully expecting to like this one, to still feel like, oh yeah, R.F. Kuang, that's another tick in the column of a solid, great writer, an interesting voice within the various genres that she is now writing within. I just wasn't expecting to just have so much fun with it. I just couldn't get enough. I devoured it pretty much in one sitting. I thought it was hilarious. I thought it had very biting commentary, and I think it shows everybody in kind of their worst forms while being entertaining at the same time. I compared it in a recent video to the show Veep, for anybody that's ever watched that show. Maybe not quite as biting as Veep. Veep is just basically like, aren't American politics awful? Whereas this one is kind of like, aren't people awful, and people on Twitter or people in the publishing industry or writers in general. And it's just like, whoever, everybody sucks is basically how it feels. And I enjoyed it. And I enjoyed how kind of unhinged our main character is, even though she's awful. I'm not saying I relate to her. I'm just saying I liked that R.F. Kuang really showed everybody in a negative light. Oddly, I had fun with it. I thought it was fun. Not fun at all would be the book Mame. This is a story that follows a young woman who is her father's caretaker, and the book really shows how demanding that is on a person's life, but then also what it is to feel very isolated when you feel like you're kind of taking that on pretty much alone, and how much it eats at you when you kind of start thinking about your life separate from that person, when you are feeling really exhausted, when you feel like you can't do it all, the guilt that settles in, and then also just the grieving process. I think it did all of those things exceptionally. I really connected to that book for a number of reasons. Obviously, I was my father's caretaker when he was dying. The situations are not exactly the same, of course. Where my dad, it was unclear what was happening, and they never figured it out. With her father in this story, they know what his medical situation is, so it's not exactly the same, but just so much of grieving, of trying to be there for that person, and just how all-consuming it is in your life, and how you honestly would do anything for that person, but in doing anything, you aren't your own person anymore. I'm sure a lot of parents can connect. It's not just something a lot of caregivers can relate to. Just in general, if you've ever had to be somebody's everything, basically. And I think it handled that very, very well. It is very sad, though. And there are a number of other things that are present in that. For example, the main character is somebody who, her family comes from a different country than the one they are living within, and so it tackles a lot of the difficulties that come with that as well. So anyway, in general, Mame I thought was very, very, very good, very hard-hitting, very sad, very emotional, but it does have some ups in it as well. It has some moments of happiness and sweetness to it as well. After that, we have God Killer by Hannah Kaner, one of my favorite books of the year, which is not a statement I needed to make because that's what this whole video is. But in general, I just adored this book. I loved how much we packed into such a short book because it's under 300 pages. But you just see so much fantastic lore, an amazing gripping opening, characters that you root for but are morally gray. You are kind of on the edge of your seat the whole time, and whenever you kind of have slower character moments, the pacing's fantastic, and that's often followed with something explosive or a reveal or amazing action. Just in general, there was just always something. I loved this one. I've talked about it, I'm sure, plenty at this point. I cannot wait for Sunbringer. I can't wait for that sequel. I am so excited. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Okay, after that, I am including rereads on this list. I know a lot of people do not include rereads in their best of, but I'm like, hey, I have 23 books, and a lot of these rereads really honestly made my reading year fantastic. I'm so excited that I picked these back up, and I'm specifically including Rhythm of War, Way of Kings, and Words of Radiance. I'm not including Oathbringer on this list, and I don't need to get into why because I've talked about that plenty. It's not that I think Oathbringer is bad. I did a Cosmere tier ranking, and I had Oathbringer pretty low. And just to be clear, the low spot that I put it in, I'm not saying I think it equates to like a 1 or a 2 star or anything like that. It's just in comparison to a lot of the rest of the Cosmere books, I would not consider that one as good. But anyway, point is, I love Store by Archive, which is funny to say right after being like, Oathbringer though. I love the series. I continue to love this series. I continue to love Kaladin. I continue to love the exploration of the world. I love all of the details that are laid out, the foreshadowing that I think means certain things, and I am excited to get into maybe some videos this year talking about different theories, so be on the lookout for those if you are somebody who likes that kind of content. Reading through the series again with those theories in mind, and also with just knowing so much more because you now have that information having read it the first time, so you can see the layering and you can see the foundation being built, and that is really exciting and very satisfying, and then it kind of clues you in as to what you think might happen. I'm talking about all the kind of fun, cool stuff, but the depth of the character exploration in this series still remains probably some of the best I have ever seen across fantasy. Kaladin is still one of my favorite characters of all time, even though I know Shallan is a character that a lot of people have a lot of debates about. I still think the exploration of her grief, of her character in general, and what she is enduring, I still think it's phenomenal. As much as I was very angry this time around reading Dalinar's backstory, which is in Oathbringer, I still think it's very commendable to write a character like that in a series, and we don't really see too many other characters like Dalinar. In general, I just think the depth of these characters is phenomenal, the world is phenomenal, and I can't wait. I can't wait for Stormlight 5. I was talking about how excited I am for Sunbringer, but obviously, Wind and Truth. I don't know what I'm gonna do when that book comes out. I feel like I'm gonna have to get so caught up with work, like so far ahead on work things, read a bunch extra, record a bunch extra, edit, do all the things that go into making videos, do all those things so that I can just disappear as soon as that book comes out. Oh, I'm so excited. Anyway, you get it. Next up, actually I'm gonna go ahead and say one that I don't own a physical copy of anymore, and that would be Kindred by Octavia Butler. I do not think that this is a book that has the highs and lows. This book is just the lows, but it is very important. It really highlights the brutality of humans. It highlights the brutality of our own history. And it also kind of really, I think, does a good job of showing intergenerational trauma. Not in the way that you might think, but in learning about, if you don't know, our main character has to try and navigate this horrible situation where for whatever reason she is being transported back in time in the United States, and she is essentially now a slave to white people, and she is not sure why this is happening. She does sometimes come back to the present. She doesn't know for how long she's going to be in the past, so she's just trying to make it. And you really dissect, because she starts to kind of figure out who is who among the people that she has encountered in the past. And it really highlights, when I say intergenerational trauma, the people in her past, in her family line, but just also in so many people's family lines who have endured so much, and how you see those kind of lasting effects, you see the way it trickles down, and how you do not come out of that unscathed, literally and metaphorically. And I think it did so many things so well. This is a book that I almost felt like I didn't want to include it in my top, because typically my top has, the gushing that I was talking about a second ago with Stormlight Archive and with Godkiller, where it's like, oh my gosh, the lore and the characters, and you're getting so excited. This is not a book to be excited about. This is a book to go through slowly, to sit with, to let it all settle in. And it feels, like I said, almost wrong to include it in a list like this, for the same reason, honestly, like Cobalt Red, where it doesn't feel right to be like, oh, look at how awful this situation is. Isn't the book great? But honestly, that's part of what makes books so amazing, is the way in which you can have such a full range of things depicted. You can have a full range of different emotions that you feel, and also the way in which it shifts your perspective, or it sort of helps further something that you knew a little bit about, but then helps you gain empathy. I think that Kindred falls into that camp. So while it is not an easy read, it's not a fun read by any means, it's still a fantastic read. Switching to another slightly older read, but not one that is the same whatsoever. We're kind of returning to fantasy, and honestly really looking at classic fantasy, and that would be the first book in the Arrows Trilogy by Mercedes Lackey. I wanted to highlight the first book in particular, as I don't feel the rest of the trilogy was as good as the first book. I still would recommend it, but the first book had so many wonderful, heartwarming moments, but also some really brutal and sad moments as well. You're looking at almost your very classic type of coming of age story and the hero's journey, its beginnings, where you have a character who comes from humble beginnings and then something happens where now they have an opportunity to learn more about magic, to have a little bit more agency in their own life. And what this book did really well, and that I haven't honestly seen in too many books ever, is how well it shows the impact of an adult on a child's life and how important it is to foster so much love and care so that that person has the ability to recognize trauma that has been done to them and to sort of rework how their mind works, how to rewire essentially, because the impact of what a child has experienced is going to affect them for basically the rest of their lives. And you do see our main character, Talia, she doesn't think for a long time to trust certain people. She doesn't think she can go to other people when wrongs have been done to her because that's just always been how it is. And so when you see these lovely moments where adults take the time to tell her that she matters, to spend time with her, to encourage her, it is one of the most beautiful things I've seen. I get kind of emotional thinking about it. And I just haven't seen a coming of age story where that component of a child's life is really highlighted so well. So for that reason, I wanted to include this. One of the first things I read in 2023, I loved that first book. The second and third books, as I said, had some things about them I didn't absolutely love, but I still think it was a very solid trilogy overall. And I cannot wait to explore more of Valdemar. I'm really meant to read more Valdemar in 2023, and just so many other things ended up taking over my TBR. But I do plan to come back to that world. After that, while not as high up as some of the others, if I were to actually literally rank these, I still wanted to include Murderbot. So I haven't completed all of what's out at the time I'm filming this. I still have the full-length novels to read, but this was just so much fun, and it was great to see anxiety and depression shown in a story that I think is so much fun, because usually you see anxiety and depression in very, very sad stories, very bleak stories, or it can feel like it's just so unrelenting and you don't see the other sides to what makes a person. And it is interesting that in a story following this, what is basically like a robot, this murder machine, you do get to see the other sides of what it's like. And I really enjoyed that. I think that it captures sort of the day-to-day annoyances of being alive, and I love that as well. The only reason I don't think it's maybe as high up as some of the other ones is because, as I am on repeat here, it doesn't quite capture the full breadth of emotions that I'm looking for in my all-time favorites, but it's still a favorite. Again, not an all-time. It's not going to make my top 5. It's a pretty hard list to break into anyway, but it's still so much fun. It's still so much fun and such a good time and so funny and so ridiculous. All Murderbot wants to do is watch their shows. They just want to watch their shows and hang out and then sometimes protect humans. And you're like, no, I get that. Can we just protect people from afar? Anyway, I really enjoyed Murderbot. I related to Murderbot, and I had a lot of fun. And I am excited to read those full-length novels. We'll see. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe after reading those full-length novels, I'll be like, never mind. It's an all-time favorite. But I've heard mixed things about the full-length novels, so we'll see. After that, this probably would. If I were to put these ranked, this would probably be in the top 5, and that would be Divine Rivals and its sequel, Ruthless Vows. Technically, I read its sequel in 2024, but I'm including it on this list because they go together and it came out in 2023. I know I'm cheating, but I thought this story was so beautiful. It's so relevant. It's so heart-shattering, and I was so taken aback by how beautiful the writing was, by how well the themes were executed, and I absolutely loved the way that basically the journalists are the heroes in this story, and you are seeing what they have to endure, what they have to sacrifice, the safety that they have to put themselves at risk. Like, they lose their safety when they put themselves at risk, is what I'm trying to say. They have to give that up in order to try and show the world the truth. And I think this is so incredibly relevant, and I just felt so much for these characters. I wanted them to have their happy ending. I was so worried. I don't remember another time that I actually stopped reading when we were in a happy moment, because I was like, I'm not ready for something to go wrong. I just want to sit in this happiness because it's so fleeting, but so vital. And I just know as I keep reading that something tragic is going to happen. And that doesn't happen too often. Usually I'm like, okay, next page. And I just wanted to sit in those happy moments with the characters. I really think that this series, I don't just think it deserves the hype. I think more wouldn't be a bad thing. I think it's fantastic. And I have to say, it's one of the few times, I don't take the Goodreads nominees and choice awards all that seriously. I know it's a popularity contest. I know it's just for fun, whatever. But I gotta say, it was actually really fun. And it made me very happy to see that one won for young adult, because I think, one, it deserved it. And two, I just think it's beautiful and it's so moving, and all the applause to that book. It's great. Now, getting back to my, I'm cheating here, because again, what I was saying about Stormlight, I know some people don't include rereads, but I reread the Shades of Magic trilogy, so all 3 books, not just one single book, all 3 books are on this list, as is Threads of Power. I have to say, I was so nervous jumping back into Shades of Magic because I was thinking, there's just no way it's going to be as good as I remember. I've read so many other things since then. I'm sure it's going to go down a little bit. And then I had such a good time rereading it. And I was like, it wasn't just that it had been a long time since rereading Shades. It'd been a long time since I'd picked up V.E. Schwab. And I've always thought, I love V.E. Schwab's writing. I think she's one of my favorite authors, and that I just like the way she tells a story. I like the literal, sentence by sentence way that she writes. I enjoy that kind of morbid twistedness to her books, and I really wasn't sure coming back to it what I was going to think. I really thought that I overhyped it in my head, and because it went through that phase where it feels like V.E. Schwab was kind of top, where everybody was talking about her works, there was always a new one coming out, or there was always one where somebody had checked out the new one and now they were looking at her older works, and it just felt like she was constantly talked about, and so it was very hyped. And then inevitably, as is the case always, when something gets too much hype, you start to see the people that are like, hey, it's not that great, which is completely fair, because I do think the internet can overhype things, and so I was thinking like, I'm gonna fall into that, and then I didn't. I read it and I was so pleasantly surprised at how much I loved it. I had so much fun. I think also, coming back to it, at the time, I found every time I picked up a Shades book, I was sad that I had to come away from this series to pick up something else. And every time I picked up something else, I'm like, I just kind of want to be back in the Shades of Magic world. I think at this point that might be the unpopular opinion. I don't think people maybe love it as much as I do. I don't know, maybe they do. Maybe I just don't see the Schwab fandom as prominently on the internet as other fandoms, but I had a great time. And then Threads of Power, what a great continuation, we'll say. It honestly just feels like it's more Shades of Magic. But I think as the series progresses, we're going to start to really focus in on some of the newer characters and new aspects of the magic that were introduced, or maybe delved into a little bit more. I had a great time. I know these characters aren't for everybody, but I just love how much life that they have and how real they feel. But I get when you don't love a character and how it can really ruin and tank your reading experience. I completely get that. I always feel like apologetic as I'm talking about, like, I know it's not for everybody, but I liked it, and I don't know why I'm doing that. I liked it. Let's just leave it at that. Next up, we have The Wishing Game. This was so wholesome, so sweet, so heartbreaking, just an emotional book all around for so many reasons. You follow a young woman who really wants to adopt this young boy that has come through her class, as she is I think a kindergarten aide. And she just has such a connection with this boy. He's currently in foster care. She wants to adopt him, but she is not necessarily somebody who has very much, and she doesn't know that she'll ever get to adopt him. And if she does, it will probably be years and years and years later. And at that point, he'll have been in foster care for so long, and it just breaks her heart. It shatters her heart. And you see there's this opportunity for her to meet this very, very famous, old, kind of charming, eccentric author who was known for writing this very successful children's series. And she has an opportunity to kind of take part in this odd game, you could say. It's obviously inspired by Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I wasn't sure I was going to feel about it because I'm like, oh, I think that sounds cute. And I picked it up and then I was like, oh, what is this book doing to me? It had so many moments that it's just like, oh, like children are so sweet and innocent. Let's not ruin them and mess them up because the world's so awful. Like, let's let them be children. And just, you see her backstory, you could call it, as well, the main character, and you're also seeing some of the things that have happened in the old man's life. He also has somebody who is the illustrator for his books who plays a role in the story, so there's a little bit of a love story in the book as well. And it's just got, if you like familial dynamics, like found family, this is the book for you. It was so darling. It was so sweet, but again, really hit so many sad moments, and I really was quite taken aback. It was so wonderful, and I'm so glad I read this, and I'm so glad I kind of dipped my toes outside of fantasy to pick that one up. Same with, of course, the ones that aren't fantasy on the rest of this list. I had one more honorable mention. This one is truly an honorable mention. The other two, as I said, are ones that might have maybe pushed Yellowface out. Maybe on a different day they'd be up there with Murderbot, which also technically this list is longer than 23 because the Murderbot novellas kind of bump up the number, but whatever. I'm counting it as one because it is pretty much right back to back. Doesn't matter. Point is, this next one is, and this last one, truly an honorable mention, and that would be Green Rider. Thanks to Sarah from Fairy Reads, whose channel I'll have linked, because I find that she's one of the only people who's really hyping this series up, and it is still ongoing. I'm very excited to keep going with this series. It's kind of exactly what I want from classic fantasy in that it feels very cozy, it feels like it transports you, and I think in another video I described it as you really feel like you're curling up next to a fire as somebody is telling you this tale, and I really loved that aspect of this. I don't think I felt as strongly in any which way for really anything that was happening in this book as much as the rest of the books on this list, which is why it is truly an honorable mention, but I really enjoyed this one. It's the first in a series, so I'm very excited to see where it goes, and in general, if you want something that has that classic fantasy feel, and has that kind of coziness to it, I would definitely highly recommend this one. I had such a good time with it. Just barely didn't quite make this list, but I am excited to see as I read through more of this series if my feelings and my fondness for it will grow, and maybe then I will be like, no, this one is a new favorite. But anyway, that's it for my top 23 books of 2023. I know it's a little self-indulgent to pick 23 books instead of narrowing it down to 10 or 5, but there's just so many books that I read this year that were great, and when I was trying to narrow it down to 10, I was like, I can't do it. And I hope that in talking about so many books, that you will find something that sounds good to you, that you want to give a shot, and that these books get even more. I know some of them are already hyped, but some of them are not that hyped, and so hopefully they'll get a little bit more love. But anyway, thanks so much for watching, and in general, thank you so much for watching, continuing to watch. If you're new here, it's great. I really appreciate all of you. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so excited and happy that we all get to continuously be happy about books. I'll have any additional information about any of these in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.